Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. About 13 months ago, Wesley Bell pulled off one of the great upsets in St. Louis political history. Propelled by anger over Ferguson and mass incarceration, Bell defeated 33-year veteran St. Louis County Prosecutor Bob McCulloch. Since then, Bell has pursued criminal justice reform while being barraged with a level of criticism almost unheard of for a county prosecutor. He fired 4 holdover prosecutors from the McCulloch years. He's been blasted for it by the St. Louis Police Officers Association. That, of course, is the city police union, often criticized for racism, that now represents Bell's prosecution staff. The so-called Blue Lives Matter groups have criticized him for being insufficiently pro-police. KMOV, Channel 4, criticized him for hiring an $18 an hour paid intern who had worked on his campaign. KSDK, Channel 5, criticized him for unpaid parking tickets on his official vehicle. The police union has criticized him for, well, just about everything. Bell's supporters see this as nothing more than a concerted attack against him by McCulloch's disaffected allies. Meantime, his office, like the city's office, faces a spike in gun violence, with several children having been shot dead. But a so-called crime summit with Mayor Lyda Krewson and the governor failed to invite him or Kim Gardner, his city counterpart. It led many to wonder why the region's 2 progressive, reform-minded, and, by the way, black prosecutors were not invited. We'll talk about that and more today with our guest, St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell. Welcome back. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Always good to be here.
Let's start with something that happened, I believe, today. County Executive Sam Page has put together what the media is called in shorthanded crime commission to take a look at the escalating rates of violent crime around our area, especially in low-income areas. You're part of that. It held its first meeting today. What, if anything, came out of that?
Well, first, just to give some background, this is the kind of collaboration that we need to see more of. And when we came in office, on day one, we started a prosecutors advisory council with members of law enforcement, with members of the community, as well as organizations. And I see this as an extension of those efforts. And this is the St. Louis County Criminal Justice Council is something that is a statute in St. Louis County. And I do want to acknowledge the county executive for reconvening this council for the first time, I think, in 40 years. And we have stakeholders at the table so that we can address these issues comprehensively and holistically. And if we're going to seriously address these issues, we got to be serious about the approach, and I think these are the right steps.
Did anything specific come out of the meeting today, or is this just a high get-to-know-you organizational meeting?
Yeah, today was the first meeting, as we discussed. And so it was more of not just get to know you, but also what are we doing and how are we going to work together?
Is your read that this is going to focus more on enforcement than anything else?
I think it's going to look at, and I think I think just about everyone who is on this council reiterated, we have to look at our crime issues holistically and comprehensively. And that's why we have so many different and diverse members of this board. So I think we have to look at it not just from an enforcement standpoint, but also a prevention standpoint as well.
What kind of resources then could your office bring to the table in terms of prevention? I mean, you guys catch these cases after the fact. Somebody's been charged, you're in charge of prosecuting them. What can the county prosecutor's office do to get ahead of this with a crime commission like this and try to short circuit a lot of this violent crime, especially aimed toward children, before it ever happens?
Well, I think that the reason that I wanted to be St. Louis County prosecutor is because it is quite apparent, it became quite apparent to me years ago that the biggest impact to reform our criminal justice system starts with the prosecutor's office. We have a carrot and a stick that we can use when someone is charged, and I'm going to use the example of a nonviolent low-level offender. We have that option to say, hey, we know that 80%, close to 80% of those who come in contact with the justice system are in need of mental health care or substance abuse care. Opiates is an issue. And when those people are low-level, nonviolent offenders, we can offer them diversion to treatment as opposed to incarceration and charging them. And when an individual gets the treatment that they need, research is clear, they are significantly less likely to reoffend. So I think we have a very large impact that we can make on mass incarceration as well as criminal justice reform.
What do you make of the push, and I'm thinking specifically of the task force that met with the governor, without you present, of course. We talked to St. Louis Police Chief Hayden on this program last week, and he indicated that everything that was coming out of this was 100% enforcement. No diversion, no anything else. This was just boots on the ground, flood the zone, put a lot of cops into these low-income neighborhoods, stop crime by busting up things like street corner drug sales. We'll get to the idea of you not being invited to that in a moment, but just philosophically, what do you make of it when you get the highest ranking official in the state and the highest ranking official in the city of St. Louis and police chiefs and everything, and what comes out of it is we're not going to do preventative work. There's nothing in this about them. This is just about getting more cops on the street and arresting more people so people can feel safe. How does that strike you?
You know, I've met Chief Hayden on several occasions, and I think that I assume that he was probably taken out of context, and we know that enforcement is necessary, and from reports that I read, I'm not in the city, they are understaffed on their with their department, and I think that is important because they do have some serious issues to deal with as well. But I have talked to him on several occasions, and I've never gotten the impression that he doesn't understand the importance and the need to offer alternatives to incarceration and treatment for those low-level nonviolent offenders. We all agree that once someone crosses that line and they are harming people and committing serious felonies, they have to be held accountable.
But in terms of this summit that essentially the governor called, if they're looking just at 100% enforcement in terms of this particular, task force, do you think that makes sense, or do you think it's just going down the road that we've been down before that doesn't lead anywhere?
Well, I think that we've seen what the tough on crime, if you will, has gotten us, and honestly, that's not a policy. We have to look at crime on a case-by-case basis, and I think what reform-minded individuals like myself see is the need to offer more options. There are times when a serious offender needs to be incarcerated, no question about that. But there are times when a low-level person who just needs drug treatment, which is a public health crisis, needs help. And I think that it's important that we get them that help because, again, and I'm research-based, I support the facts and where the data leads us. And what the data tells us is that when an individual gets treatment, they are significantly less likely to reoffend. And when they don't, it's the opposite.
What happened, pardon me, at this summit with the mayor, the governor? You were not invited. Kim Gardner, the circuit attorney in the city, was not invited. My understanding is you sent a staff member anyway, and he was allowed into the meeting. But a couple of questions. Number one, they said this was about enforcement and therefore no prosecutors were invited. Do you buy that?
I would rather, I think it's incumbent on leadership to come together and work together. And so, although we found out about the, whatever you want to call it, crime summit through the media, this was just too important. And, had I known, I would have been able to rearrange my plans so that I could be there. So I wanted to make sure that my second in command was there, and I'll say this: you cannot have a conversation about enforcement or diversion or dealing with serious offenders without the prosecutors.
Do you think this was a direct slap at the new generation of reform-minded prosecutors, you, Kim Gardner, that you were excluded? I mean, do you think that was the hidden agenda here, that we're going to have the cops and the elected officials, but we're not going to have these two outliers in here because that would just muddy things up?
I would rather err on the side of giving the benefit of the doubt, and I would think that there's probably just a disconnect with understanding the impact that prosecutors have on the criminal justice system, and some not knowing that. And you know, when I do meet with the governor, that's something that I'll communicate, because I think that it's important. And these kind of summits or what have you have happened in the past, and they've always included prosecutors. And so I think it's important that we're all at the table, and I'll communicate that. Now,
the governor's back in the area again today. You haven't met with him yet?
I have not as of yet, but I will be meeting with him. And again, I think this is a teachable moment. I think it's a learning opportunity for our region to understand that we cannot stay in our silos. We cannot deal with these issues without coming together and working together to address those issues. And that's why I thought it was important that, even though we didn't get a quote-unquote invite, that we were still there. And
you might call it a teachable moment. A lot of people might call it business as usual.
You know what? I'm trying to stay positive. I'm going to stay positive. I think, again, this region is divided enough that we have enough of those voices to where I think it's important that some of us say, hey, we're going to work to bring people together. And I campaigned on that, and I'm going to stick to that now, because I think it's important. And when people make mistakes, we'll call them out for that, but we're going to try to bring people together.
One of the things that's galvanized people around this area, in fact, the thing this summer, is the killing of all these children aged 16 or under, but not only in the city, but in North County, in the Metro East. A number of these have happened on your jurisdiction in St. Louis County. And I'm not even quite sure what the question is here, but as near as I can come to formulating it, it's from your point of view as a prosecutor, but also previously as an activist who spent a lot of time on these streets talking to people. What goes through the mind of people after a child has been shot that they don't come forward with the information? I mean, you talk to cops all over and they'll say, look, somebody knows something. Now, in a couple of the, again, outlier cases, the one where the kid got his dad's gun and shot himself and an arrest was made, the case when these two white guys shot and killed a black kid on the south side and an arrest was made, but there, otherwise, crickets. Nobody has been hauled in. What is going on here, and what can you as a prosecutor do about it, if anything?
You know, that's a very good question, and it's a complex one. And so I'll answer it in two parts. First, with our office, we recognize that we have a substance abuse and a mental health issue in not only this region, but this country. And that's why we have been very aggressive with pushing to expand those resources to make sure we get people the help they need, because oftentimes those are the individuals that, left untreated, turn into your shooters or victims, unfortunately. And then from a larger standpoint, we have to take a serious look at some of the issues that we are dealing with or not dealing with from a societal standpoint. We know for a fact that communities with access to quality education are safer communities. And when we look at some of the school districts in the region, they leave a lot to be desired, and we need to improve them and invest in those. When we see a community with opportunities and access to jobs, job training and actual jobs, I should say, you see safer communities. And when you see a breakdown in those things, you see more of this kind of violence. And the sad part about it is, and I want to add this, is that they're getting younger and younger. And that's a cultural issue that we need to address. And you alluded to people not feeling comfortable coming to talk and cooperate with law enforcement with information. A lot of that has to do in communities where we haven't seen that community policing component.
Do you think people being reluctant to come forward with information they might have is because they don't trust the police, they're afraid of retaliation from the shooters, They might conceivably be involved in some sort of illegal activity themselves and they don't want to bring it to anybody's attention. A combination of these. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what the dynamic is in a community or any community where somebody has got to know who pulled the trigger in these cases, but nobody is saying a word.
Yeah, this is an issue. This is an issue that has very deep roots. That is a cultural issue, and when you have some communities that have never had good relationships with law enforcement, people are just not going to come and talk with law enforcement, and that's why, you know, for years we have been pushing community policing initiatives where we start helping bridge that gap. And we set up a community engagement team in our office, and so we have a director of community engagement. We have a part-time community engagement person as well, because we see the need to get out and explain to people not only what we're doing but why we're doing it, and that's a big reason why Ferguson happened. A lack of that engagement, a lack of that outreach, where people didn't feel connected to their government and their law enforcement, and you saw what happened.
As a prosecutor, do you feel what some people have proposed would make a lot of sense? That is, the legislature carves out a special area to tighten gun laws in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, much like has taken place in Philadelphia, where Pennsylvania's open carry laws do not apply in Philly. I mean, is that a good idea? Would it help, or are there so many guns on the street already that it just wouldn't make any difference?
Listen, I'll take any gun control, common sense gun control initiatives that we can get passed. I'll take them. Now, will they help? I'm sure that it would help. Will it solve the problem? Likely not. We're going to need ultimately something much more comprehensive, because if you can just go into the next county and get the same gun, people are going to do that. And so, yeah, as a prosecutor, it would help us after the fact to be able to prosecute the individual. But at that point, we have a victim, and now we have a family that's dealing with the loss of a loved one. And so that's a Band-Aid on a broken leg. Maybe it'll help a little. And again, the legislators, and I know some legislators who are pushing that, hey, I respect the heck out of what they're trying to do, and they're trying to get something done, because we're running up against a brick wall, because Republicans, by and large, just are not willing to talk about gun control.
Now, when we talk about policing and we talk about public safety, obviously, you know, the criminals are one component. The community's relationship with police officers is another. There was that incident a few weeks ago where the officer shot and killed a guy over near the Galleria Mall. And immediately there was an explosion, at least on social media, of doubts about that, of people saying, well, you know, the officer claims this, but as far as we're concerned, that's his word against, you know, whatever, and we need to see some video. If the guy was brandishing a gun at him, you know, then it was a good shoot. If he wasn't, it wasn't. Where does that case stand? Is there video in the parking garage of that incident, and if so, is it going to be released?
So here's the thing about that. So the way it works is that the St. Louis County, in this case, law enforcement, will do their investigation. At that point, we are there solely for support. If they need anything to assist with that investigation, we don't take over until it's turned over to us, and it hasn't been turned over to us.
So it's an internal police department investigation?
It's not internal, because St. Louis County is doing this investigation, and
St. Louis County Police are doing the investigation.
Correct. They are handling the investigation, which I am a proponent for the same department not investigating their own shooting or what have you. And so this department,
Richmond Heights,
immediately contacted St. Louis County, and St. Louis County started on the investigation. So I am letting them do their job, and once it's turned over to us, obviously we're going to be as transparent as we possibly can. That doesn't always happen immediately, but it will happen, and I am confident that they are doing everything that needs to be done. And we're keeping a close eye on it. So I can't go into a lot of the details because I don't want to compromise their investigation, but there's a lot to get through, and they're going to be thorough, and we want them to do that.
Anything you would say to the folks who were protesting, like out in front of the Galleria, shutting down traffic, like a week or so ago? Any message to them, because they obviously don't trust the investigation? What would you say to them?
Well, you know what, what I would say more so, not necessarily to any individual, is that if we don't want people to protest, then let's improve our systems. Let's improve our institutions so that people don't feel a need to protest. And so, as long as it's peaceful, I think it's their right. Our country is built on that right. But I will say to anyone, any St. Louis County resident, that we are going to be as thorough and as detailed with this investigation as we possibly can, and we're going to be as transparent as we possibly can, but sometimes that takes a little time.
Talk to me about this unit you started, I believe it's called the Conviction and Incident Review. From the title of it, it seems like you're reviewing past convictions or past incidents involving police to see if they pass muster. And tell me what it is and what it involves.
So that's our CIRU unit, and it's a Conviction and Incident Review unit. And so that unit will be charged with several things. One will be cases involving police shootings, cases that are involving legitimate claims of wrongful conviction. And there's a few other things that we're considering turning over to that unit, because it will be a walled-off, dedicated unit that will not have the same interactions with law enforcement. And I think what's important for people to understand is that we work with law enforcement every day. We have built some really great relationships, but in our investigations, you get to know these individuals, and there's an appearance of interdependence and an appearance of impropriety when those same individuals that you're now become friends with and you have these close working relationships, when you're the one investigating. So we're creating a walled-off unit that won't have those same interactions that can investigate these types of crimes.
Why create the unit in the first place? I mean, are there specific suspicions that there may be some cases out there where people have been wrongly convicted, where there has been maybe police misconduct that has not been caught? I mean, why set a segregated, walled-off unit like this up in the first place?
Again, I think it's where the research and the data takes us, and the data and the research shows us nationwide that wrongful convictions are happening, and they happen at a surprisingly alarming rate. And so we are charged with disseminating justice. And I think that it is incumbent on every prosecutor's office to have protocols in place to ensure that the people that we put behind bars need to be there. And if they don't, we need to have those protocols in place where we get them out of jail. And we know with DNA evidence and that so many stories of wrongfully convicted people who have served 20, 30 years of a sentence finally being released. And I think that it's incumbent on us and that's a part of us doing our job.
In the 8 months you've been in office, you've been subject to a lot of criticism, in fact, a good deal more than I remembered any prosecutor recently. Some of it seems, quite frankly, as a journalist, almost foolish. I mean, there was that one story about an intern in your office, and I've talked to other reporters, and they said, we don't feel that story should have ever made it on the air. Another one about you gleaning a lot of parking tickets on your official vehicle, then criticisms in general from the St. Louis Police Officers Association over the firings of predecessors, or people who were on the staff of your predecessor. I mean, you can comment on the specific cases if you want, but my general question is, what do you think is going on here when you get a barrage of stuff like this? I mean, do you think it's legitimate, it's just part of the job, or do you think a lot of this is because you're a reform-minded black prosecutor who happened to knock off a guy who was pretty popular among law enforcement and been on the job 3.5 decades?
It's unfortunately politics as usual. And that's why I continue to beat the drum that we have enough divisive rhetoric in this region that we need to start bringing people together. And, it disappoints me that, my predecessor isn't there to be able to ask questions to, as you would think.
And you've had no communication with him at all? I mean, have you guys reached out to each other? You said, hey, Bob, you know, this is going on. How did your office? Okay.
I'm going to say this. What we're seeing is our those who were in power for 30 plus years, and a lot of relationships and a lot of jobs that were given out through those years, and people who now are faced with a sudden change, not only in that dynamic, but also just in the direction that the county voters and residents want to go. We're recognizing that opiates are affecting everyone. We're recognizing that drug abuse has affected us for a generation, and we've given it a head start. And so, yeah, you see these petty stories, but it's politics, and the sad thing is that I know that you all in the media have the toughest job in the world, and when we hear rhetoric coming out of Washington about fake news and undermining the job that you all do, it only, when a reporter runs a ridiculous story, a baseless story like that, it only it only reiterates that mindset and undermines the journalists like you who are doing their job in good faith. It only undermines your ability to do that, and it undercuts the public's confidence in journalism and the job you all do. And so I know that you have a great job, and we try to be as transparent as we possibly can, coming on the show and talking openly about.
But it sounds like
issues.
you have talked to Bob McCulloch, and the results haven't exactly been pleasant.
You know, I'm not going to go there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Two quick final questions.
God bless him.
One is specific, which is the Mike Brown, Darren Wilson case. Your office has been reluctant to reopen that entire can of worms and reconvene the grand jury. That was your position the last time you were on this program, that it wasn't anywhere near the top of your list. Is that still, you can't see that being reopened absent new evidence?
You know, and let me be clear, that is a legitimate question. And so I completely respect the question, but you know, the way I look at it is that that was a very traumatic time for this region and this county, and it continues to be divisive, and if you bring that up in any kind of story, you'll just see the comments that just get cruel. And so for that reason, you know, my comment is I don't have any comment on it until and if I ever do. And so I don't want to go there, because keep in mind, there's family members that are watching and people who are touched by it. And every time we talk about that, it brings that back up, that a young man is gone. And so, you know, if we ever have if there's ever an opportunity where we have something else to add to it, you'll be the first to know. Okay,
and a final question, and this is a broader question. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you've got reformers like yourself who take a so-called holistic view of criminal justice reform. You look at situations and you say, well, pathology is a result of poverty, it's the result of racism, it's the result of long-term trauma, if we can intervene first, et cetera, et cetera. Long-term, that's all well and good. Short-term, even though most people might agree with you long-term, people are demanding that they feel safe and secure
Absolutely.
In their own homes and walking down the street. And for that reason might say, okay, you know, get tough with them, throw them in jail. Can you reconcile those two? Is there a tension there between recognizing the long-term causes of this and trying to act forcefully and immediately to try to get some serious sociopaths with guns off the street?
I think we have to do two things at once sometimes. We have to walk and chew gum, if you will. And what we have to recognize, and we have recognized, is that that when we look at prevention on the front end, that's about saving someone from being a victim. That when we talk about treatment, what we're looking at is we're adding the options, adding the tools in the tool belt to say we're going to look at each case on a case-by-case basis. And some of those cases involve serious crimes where that individual needs to be locked away. And so one thing that we did, and I'll give you a quick anecdote, is that my predecessors, the protocol was murder cases were essentially divided out to whichever attorney was on the homicide phone. And so what the result is that we came into the office and we did an analysis and saw that we had attorneys that would have 2 or more murder cases who had never been the first chair of a trial. And so when we talk to families, and I talk to every victim of a family that wants to talk to me, the first question they ask is, who's handling my case and what experience do they have? So we pulled those cases from the attorneys who were less experienced. We created a homicide unit, and so the overwhelming majority of our murders are with that homicide unit, which are the most experienced prosecutors in the office, and then the rest of the homicides are with team leaders who are also the most experienced attorneys in the office. So between our sex team, because we know that sexual assault, those cases are very serious, and we want to make sure that we also deal with them appropriately. Between the sex team and our homicide unit, those are the most experienced attorneys in our office. And so I say that to say, in addition to expanding our diversion programs and being aggressive with the treatment options and care options for mental health and substance abuse, we're also being serious about crime by making sure that our most experienced attorneys are handling those cases to make sure that victims receive the respect and dignity that they deserve and the justice.
St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Our thanks to County Prosecutor Wesley Bell for joining us, and our thanks to you for being here too. We hope you can join us back here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report. We'll see you then.